in this afternoon where I was, so I hope you're all safe and dry.
I thought this was the backup. I thought we were gonna try Blackboard today.
All right. So, Olivine, do you suspect that there's some on? We need to agree on what is it that we're gonna use.
Yeah, because I was over there and then someone said that Miss OMT was over here, so I switched.
I've sent the link. I've sent the link in the class group, sir. So person should be seeing it right now to come over to Zoom.
Right. So when we have more persons, we're gonna have to figure out which we feel more comfortable with, and so we can know exactly where we'll meet on a Tuesday evening. Okay.
Right. That's what I need. Thanks.
Great. Is Trisha Gay here?
I'm here, sir.
Great. Just remember, you're my sidekick, you know.
Okay.
You said that reluctantly. Things become used 20 of you on. So I'll begin and have the others join us. All right. So I'm going to begin by doing just a quick recap of what our class was last week, and then we can continue. So, Katharina? Katharina?
Yes, sir.
Hey,
Sir?
how are you?
I'm not bad. I'm not bad.
Great. All right. Do you want to help us with our little recap of what we did last week? Just tell us what you remember from the conversation.
We did an introduction, I guess, of the different types of research. We looked at quantitative research, qualitative research, and the mixed method research. So that's essentially what I'm remembering from it.
All right. So you remember at the high level. All right. It's good. Daniel? Daniel? Sabrina? Okay, Sabrina.
Oh, yes. Adding to what Katharina said, the mixed method research is basically an integration of the qualitative and quantitative method of research. I think quantitative deals with like the linear stuff and all of that. And
linear stuff. What's that? Linear stuff.
How do I explain this now? Like measures, different levels of measurements and stuff like that.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah.
And qualitative is the recursive. I think like qualitative deals more like with descriptions and stuff like that. Yeah, that's just my little take from last week.
All right, Debbie.
Sir, my answer was already given.
Them take away answer.
Well, Debbie didn't talk about construct and concept.
Oh,
Yeah, it's useful to talk about, but I don't want to go to the assignment yet. I just want to, so I want to hear some more. So what I'm hearing so far is that we spoke about the methodologies. So we spoke about qualitative, quantitative, and mixed in a brief way. And so we're trying to make some of the distinctions. So Debbie,
Yes, sir.
go ahead.
Well, one of the things I remember apart from those that were already mentioned is your emphasis that to be mindful that a research can have qualitative and quantitative data, but it is not considered mixed unless there's a deliberate attempt to integrate both in interpreting the problem or in our understanding the problem.
Good, good. So that integration, as you mentioned about the interpretation, but the integration can take place at other points, which we'll talk about at some point. Yeah, so good, good, good. All right, let me see who else I want to help us here. Just one last person, and Marsha. So what you recall from the conversation about the methodologies?
All right. Well, I know that the methodologies. I know about the integration, and I also understand that the qualitative goes more into asking questions. You kind of develop questions, and to portray that in your document, you normally create like a storyline, basically. And for the quantitative, it focuses more on the numerical data, and you can combine it either by doing, I was reading something today, but it's all over the place, sir. You have to go help me.
It is
Yeah,
good
I
that
started reading something, but yeah, but I know they said something about 3 different ways you can integrate the data. You can either do quantitative first or convergent, where you do quantitative and qualitative together and you analyze them as one. So you kind of merge it, or you can do the another method, which is what explanatory sequential, where you use a quantitative method first, and then you use that information now to create the qualitative questions to explain those results. The third one, I kind of hazy about it. I probably need your help with to explain the exploratory sequential one for me.
All right. So later down in the conversation, what you're really talking about is design.
Mixed methods,
design,
yeah, the mixed
right?
methods, yeah.
So those are the designs that are used for mixed methods. So in qualitative, there are some designs. In quantitative, there are some designs. And in mixed, there are also some identified designs, right?
Yeah.
So further down in the conversation, we're gonna have some, in the class, we're gonna have some conversation around the designs, right? So good,
Yeah.
it's nice. You've been doing some reading though. And so what is good about that is that you may not always remember everything or understand everything. And so it's opportunity to come to class and to ask some things. All right. So let me do an addition to the recap that I heard. So if you remember, we said that when we're talking about methodology, we're focusing on quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods research. I also said that there's a difference with the methodology and the methods. So when I refer to methodology, I am referring to quant, qual, or mixed, and it can either be research methodology, research paradigm, or research approach. But if we're focusing on the quantitative side, we could be thinking about numbers, figures, statistics. Quantitative research is said to be more on the objective side. It takes a deductive approach. Your research questions are surely going to be different. How you collect the data is going to be different. So your instrument will also be different. So for example, I could administer a test and I'm collecting quantitative, or my intention is to collect quantitative data, or just like in the recent election, leading up to the election, they did, polls. The persons who come around and do census, that's a part of more quantitative in focus, right? How the data is analyzed is different. So it uses a lot of statistical analysis, right? The reporting of that data also differs in terms of language and style, as opposed to qualitative research. So qualitative research, on the other hand, focuses on things like, text, it could be photographs, videos, different types of images, words, sounds. And so the method of data collection can be different. So we can be thinking about things like interviews, focus groups, observation, observing people's emotions, people's behaviors, all of those things. Our instrument is also going to be different. So we're using things like, focus group guides, conversation guides. If we're thinking around the language, so last week, for example, I'd said, or the objective. So on the qualitative side, we set out to explore. And for example, I think the conversation went to the point where we're talking about qualitative research being more on the subjective side. It takes an inductive approach, right? We build theory in qualitative research, and in quantitative research, we set out to test theory, which is why we actually hypothesize, right? So those are some of the conversations that we had last week. And then if you recall, I'd also spoken about, well, I gave in the notes, which by the way, Trisha,
Sir, one second. You say quantitative, try to, what with theories? Test the theories?
So quantitative research,
Yeah.
the intent of quantitative research is actually test theory, which is why we hypothesize, right? While qualitative research, we set out to build theories. So if you remember, also I was asking you about 6 examples of theories that you can identify with. And we spoke about HR theories, or theories that are relevant to HR. So things like, leadership, things like satisfaction, motivation, those theories. And those theories didn't just come by, by the ear. It was a qualitative process that led to the development of those theories, right? So on the qualitative side, we set out to build theories from ground in many instances, right? While quantitatively, we set out to test theories, right?
Okay.
Okay. Please do me a favor, look on the course outline. My email address is there. Could you just send me, or Olivine I think is in this chat, yeah, right, Olivine. So, or I probably go back and look if my slide wouldn't be there, but I can share the slide with you so you can recall some of that conversation. So we spoke about the three processes in research. We looked at one that was more quantitative in nature, and it looked a bit linear, right? It was more on the linear side. Then we also looked on one that was more on the qualitative side, and at one point we saw that was somewhat recursive, right? So if you notice in this middle portion here, are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Right. So in this middle portion here is recursive. So we start with interpretation, then you go to the conceptualization, then you tighten that up with research questions, then you go back into the loop to collect data and it loops. So I heard the word recursive earlier and bingo. I think it was Marsha who spoke about
No,
was Marsha.
Sabrina thing.
Oh, Sabrina, all right. Yeah, take your credit, Sabrina. Okay. So there's a little bit of recursiveness happening there before the write-up, right? And then we also spoke about the mixed methods process, right? And this is Collins's 13-step mixed methods. And you see, starting with the goal of the study, right back to the point where the formulation of research question becomes important. So in the beginning portion up to process 5 or step 5, research questions are created, and as the research actually comes to an end, the researcher is now forced to reflect on what he or she has found and then to come up with some new set of research questions, which will then send you back into a cycle to start a new research or to add to a body of literature, right?
Sure, question.
That is like the design thing I was reading then.
So, so some of what I think I heard, or not I think I heard, some of what I heard earlier about explanatory and convergent and stuff is part of the design. So as part of the design, if you notice this process here speaks to, at one point, the design of the study. Here, step 7, it speaks about the mixed methods design. So the contributor earlier who was talking about convergent and exploratory and explanatory, that is where all of that comes in now. The thought around the design of research. But we're going to talk about that because quantitative has its own design. So we could be looking at a current, it was this same class that I spoke about. Pardon me, because I have several classes that I'm doing research with now. But I just remember it was this class that I was talking about comparing the shoe size of men and women, right? So on the quantitative side, you could be looking at relational, you could be looking at causal comparative, you could be looking at descriptive. On the qualitative side, you could be looking at case studies, ethnography, grounded theory, narrative, phenomenology. And on the mixed method side, so we're talking about design. On the mixed method side, we have explanatory sequential, exploratory sequential, and convergent design.
Excuse me, sir.
Don't feel flustered now. We're going to talk about those in more depth later down in the class. Yes, who is that?
Oh, okay, because I was just saying that the quantitative designs that you spoke about, like what I found was just like experimental research and surveys. I kind of got thrown off with the others that you listed a while ago because, you know, I never really saw those when I was reading.
So let me touch on that just briefly, and then we're gonna you know, progress with the conversation. You are right, because on the quantitative research design, so if you look at it in two broad categories, in quantitative, you have what is known as experimental research, and you have what is known as quasi-experimental research, right? So you have that pure experimental, where it happens in the lab, where you're looking at control group and experiment group, right?
Yeah.
So that's really under observation on a microscope in a very strict sense. And then you have on the quasi-experimental side, you have, you know, other type research. So you mentioned about survey, for example. Yeah. Survey, yeah. I've seen literature that actually speaks to survey being a part of the design as well, a quantitative research design, right?
Yeah.
So you're right, but again, depending on who you read, you will see predominantly they will speak to descriptive, relational, and relational can actually be correlational or predictive or prediction, right?
Yes.
So a prediction can also be quasi-experimental, not a full experiment, but quasi-experimental, right?
Yes, sir.
Why we hypothesize in that respect, right?
Okay.
And we also have the causal comparative. So when you look at cause and effect, for example, that's a part of the causal comparative. Or when we look at the difference between variables, we're still looking at quantitative research. So there are several designs that are out there, but if you put them in two broad categories, you have the experimental and the non-experimental, or the quasi-experimental, right? So much of what I was talking about is on the side of the quasi-experimental. Okay?
Sir.
Good. All right, so we can move on from our recap. Yeah, but it's good. I hear people talking about reading, which is excellent, right? So last week we ended the class talking about paradigms and philosophical assumptions, right? Before I go any further, I just want to get a sense from a few persons what they found about concept and construct. So let me see, Natasha, what did your reading tell you about construct and concepts? You there with us, Natasha? Okay, seem not. Lorenzo?
Oh, yes, I'm here, sir.
Yeah, what did you come upon?
Came upon a few things, sir. What I got from a concept is that a concept is like an abstract idea. It can be measured through direct and indirect observations. That's also something that I got. I got that.
But what does that mean, Lorenzo? What exactly does that mean? So it can be measured through direct or indirect observation. What?
Yeah, man. So for example, like if you want to get some information, like for example, say like someone age or date of birth or those type of stuff. No, I mean like age or color of their hair or stuff. You can directly observe that to see like the color of the person's hair is black or blonde, or the indirect observation is where you would like use like a survey or a questionnaire to actually gather that information. That's what I got from it.
Okay, but what if you look at it this way? So if you remember my example last week, when I was talking about, you know, I don't remember what the classmate who I was actually dialoguing it with, but I was asking her about whether or not she likes, you know, fancy cars and stuff, right? And she sure said yes, right? So we have concepts which are more on the tangible side that we can see and touch and feel and observe. And there are things, you know, that also they're very abstract. So for example, love and hate and all of those things, you know. So we can't necessarily see some of those things. We may see manifestations, but we're not necessarily seeing those things, but we're seeing the clothes and the car and the food and all of those things, the chair that you're sitting on, if you're sitting on a chair now, your computer, all of those things are concepts. And so, you know, we often hear about concept cars. So before a car really comes out on the manufacturing line, we hear about a concept, them building a concept. Yeah? That's
Yes,
how you can think about it as well. And some of those concepts are abstract, and some of those concepts are observable.
Also, like for example, if you're doing an art piece, you have that thought of what you would be putting on paper. That would be the concept, and when you put it on paper, that would be the construct.
It's not necessarily construct.
Something.
Because, like I said, you know, a concept can be seen, so it can be tangible. You can touch it and feel it and stuff. But also there are some things. So you mentioned art, for example. There are some things that are very abstract. And so, you know, you just only have to kind of imagine it, but you can't see it, you can't touch it, right? So if we think about, for example, you know, from a religious perspective, you know, people talk about the presence of God. But as we identify, God is a spiritual being, and so it's not physical, right? But there are persons who really appreciate that God presence, right? It's not a construct because we can't measure God, right? So it's more on the concept side, but it is recognized, yeah? As for example, when you go to church, all of those physical things, so your Bible, for example, is still a concept, but you can actually physically touch that Bible. Yeah?
Okay, so I got you.
Natasha?
Sir?
Help us with what you found, Natasha. Reynolds? All right. When Natasha is... Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, sir. Good evening.
Hey.
I have a question, right?
All right. So you have to tell me who is that now.
I'm Denworth. Denworth, sir.
Yes. Okay. Great.
Okay. Sorry about just jumping in. What you just said, sir. Can the concept become the construct based on the car example?
Well, the thing about with constructs are usually measurable. Yeah. So you set out to research some of those things. So I'm not sure about the concept becoming a construct, but I won't say no. I sure won't say no, because you can probably, for example, look to do research on people's perception of a car.
Yeah, okay.
Of a model of car, or you know, the ride of a car. So while the car is a concept, right, a physical concept, but then you can measure the construct of satisfaction of a particular car. There's some people who just, you know, head over heels, and so your car, but especially for men, especially for men because women too, but your car is like, especially if it's a, you know, a hot car, you know, it helps you with your self-esteem and everything else. And so you can measure that self-esteem. And so that self-esteem is a construct and be measured.
That's why I asked you that question, sir, because when the concept car is still get the wow factor, which I don't think you can measure it, but when it starts to sell, you can measure it. You understand what I'm saying, sir?
Yes. But you can also, even at that point of a concept, and the concepts usually, so our phones and all of those things, they just don't come out of the blue. It is really the manufacturers actually find out from people what it is that they want, what new features and stuff they want, right?
Okay.
And so they're looking to actually research and to try and find ways of understanding what people desire in a modern car.
Okay.
Yeah? So I can see where some of the thought process out of a concept can turn into a construct that is measured. So like your esteem, right? Or your perception of, as I said, the ride of a car, or marketers also look at affordability, right? So
Okay.
whether or not you can afford a particular car, you look at now at the environmentally friendly aspects of the car and stuff. And so those are things that can be measured, which are more on the construct side.
Okay, so I have an appreciation for the concept now.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Sir, concepts cannot be measured, just the constructs?
I'm not sure about, I've never heard about concepts being measured. I'll make a note of that. I've never heard about concepts being measured. Giselle? I'm actually going to make a note of that question. Giselle? Giselle,
yes, sir.
tell me what you found from your reading.
Okay, so I just read an article. I didn't, and I guess I'm just not understanding. So I saw something that said that a concept is a construct, and it can be measured. The thing is, I'm not, so if you say that a concept can be seen, so I'm not understanding how you flow from a concept and a construct. So even though I'm seeing things in terms of what I'm reading, I'm not getting the understanding of separating them.
Which source did you read?
This article is a website that I found. It spoke of chapter 4 theories in scientific research. So it started on explaining like what is a theory, etc. And then they highlighted, for example, a figure that shows a distinction between theoretical and empirical concepts. So they showed a table that said construct A, and an arrow that shows proposition and construct B. And then below it, they had independent variable, hypothesis, and dependent variable.
You said construct A and construct B?
Yeah.
Okay, right. So which means you're pretty much saying what we're saying, because as I was saying, constructs are usually what we measure. And so those constructs, within those constructs, you can identify different variables. So like we spoke about last week, you know, having independent and dependent variables, for example. Right?
Okay. Well, okay, so what I wanted to ask, okay, so you're saying the concept, so I think I kind of got when you spoke of the Bible. So you can physically see it, it's tangible, you can touch it, but it can't be measured, right? And then you said the construct is measurable. So what do you measure as a construct?
So people, for example, can actually measure how well people, or do research on how well people understand the Bible.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay.
So people's perception of religion can be seen as a construct. People's belief about religion can be seen as a construct. Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of research, so where does concept and construct in terms of qualitative and quantitative research and mixed methods,
How does that?
A good question.
Okay.
So, for example, when we're setting out to measure, like in HR, people's self-esteem, employee engagement, employee satisfaction, things like those. So
Okay.
employee satisfaction, employee engagement, workforce diversity, all of those things are constructs.
Constructs, okay.
Constructs, yes, that
Yes, sir.
researchers are interested in studying. So like last night, for example, I was talking to a class and we're talking about COVID, the COVID experience. And so we're talking about how does that actually impact, how does COVID, for example, impact employees' self-esteem, right?
Okay.
Or how COVID impact people's motivation on the job. So things like self-esteem and motivation and things like those are constructs which are measurable.
Okay, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right. So let us move on to the meat of the matter today. So
Quick question before you move on.
yes.
Still want to make sure I'm clear. So all right, so in this example, here would be the concept, but here length or here color would be the construct.
Or texture.
Or texture would be the construct, but here in and of itself is the concept.
So here is a concept because you can see it. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yes. But you want to find out. So for example, last week we're talking about the hair texture and hair quality and all of those things. Those are things that you can measure. You can measure the hair, but you can measure or you can ask people about their perception of their hair quality, their hair type, the color of their hair, the cut of their hair. So like ladies, for example, like very nice haircuts. And so you're not measuring their hair, but you're measuring their perception of their hair, or you're measuring how, for example, their hair allows them to feel confident. There's some people who have nice haircuts and it makes them feel on top of the world.
So you're saying then, sir, the constructs are usually related to behavior and attitude?
It could be more than that. Behavior and attitudes are constructs that can be measured, but it could be several things. Constructs could be several things, including behaviors and attitudes.
Right, I guess as we go forward,
Yeah. What's important now to understand is to focus on what are some of the things that are measurable around us. And if you look at it from an HR lens, things like satisfaction, motivation, engagement, burnout, stress, you know, employee emotions, all of those things are constructs that are measurable.
So what would be the concept in that case?
All right, so listen, let us not dwell on construct and concept, because we're going to use this to overshadow the class. If I find, for example, I'm going to try and find, so Trisha Gay, please help me here while I'm making notes. I'm going to find an article. I'm going to find a nice clear article that helps the class to understand or to appreciate concept and construct, right?
Okay, sir.
So let me so I'm going to make a note, Trisha Gay, and you're going to follow up with me, right? Okay. All right, so I'm writing down article on concept and construct. So I'm not dismissing it. I just want us to cover some more ground. So Trisha Gay, you're gonna remind me to do that follow-up, okay? All right. Right. So last week we started talking about the worldviews that we have or that are associated with research. And I'd said that on the quantitative side, one particular worldview that is accepted on that from that lens is what is known as post-positivism. So post-positivists take on post-positivism as a worldview. So let me give you an example. There are people who will say, boy, I'm a numbers person, you know, or I love figures, or I'm a math person, or I'm a stat person, right? And so what that implies is that they are taking on a more numeric side of things. They see the world through numbers and stats and those sorts of things, right? We also have people who see the world through a constructivism or constructivist approach. So constructivism is a particular worldview or a particular lens through which we see the world. So for example, I think it may have been Lorenzo earlier who spoke about art, right? So people who are more on the constructivist side, you know, artists and stuff, see the world through that lens. Or teachers, for example, you know, who are more, you know, linguistic and stuff, they see the world through a more constructivist lens. There are persons, however, who are advocates. So as I said last week, we have persons who advocate for the rights of persons who are quote unquote disadvantaged or marginalized. So persons who fight for the rights of persons with disabilities of different types, people who are incarcerated, you know, women, children, men, some types of men and stuff. So those people are more on the side of being, they see things through a more participatory lens. Their views are more political in the sense that they are advocating for the rights of a particular group. You
That's
also have,
also, right, sir?
okay?
That's a transformative worldview,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Oh.
you're right. You're right. You're right. So these people are also, you know, on the path to transform, right? And what is also useful to note is that their participants are also very much included and integrated in whatever they're lobbying for or fighting for or seeking to transform. So for example, persons who fight for women's rights, they just don't come to the forefront and fight for women's rights. The women actually are active participants in the process, right? So they engage with their participants, the participants give them feedback, and in some instances are very much involved in that process of trying to establish a movement which then sees the change in a particular process, right? So even if you look at you know, this whole thing of Black struggle and all of those things, that is one lens that you could actually see this participatory, you know, worldview through. There is the pragmatic worldview or pragmatic lens, which says that that researcher is able to see the world or see things through different lenses, right? So the persons who are, you know, mathematically, you know, inclined, numbers, figures, and also those who can, you know, have an appreciation for art and the arts and drama and music and all of those things and words and stuff, you know, combined, they have that vantage point of seeing things, you know, through a different lens or through a more comprehensive lens. Pragmatists, they oftentimes use or employ what is considered, you know, what works. So whatever a particular situation actually, provides, they try to make the best of those situations, right? So their lens is not somewhat one-sided or one-track, but they try to see the world through different lenses, a blend or a mix of lenses, right? What is useful to note for all the worldviews that you see set out here in this matrix, there are certain what Cresswell, for example, terms, and other researchers terms a set of philosophical assumptions. So whenever, for example, you come across the word an ontology, what it really is, it's a way of or an assumption that we can use to judge the things that are around us. So ontology, epistemology, axiology, methodology, and rhetoric are all what is known as philosophical assumptions, while our worldviews are pragmatism, post-positivism, constructivism, and the participatory or transformatory. You will also see interpretivism that is linked with constructivism. So some of the times you'll see constructivism / interpretivism. That's more on the qualitative side. Post-positivism, positivism is more on the quantitative side. Participatory, transformatory can either be qual or quan, right? And equally, for pragmatists or pragmatism, both quan and qual can be used and is integrated, right? So here, and if you can't see this when I send you PowerPoint, let me know. This matrix pretty much breaks it down. It's not in any of the text that I've sent you, but because it's simply a one page, I probably can do a WhatsApp of the book, of that, just that page in the book. So it's sharp, crisp, and clear. So you can actually appreciate the worldviews which are at the top here, and the philosophical assumptions which are on this vertical axis, right? So if you're thinking about, for example, an ontology, it's looking at what's the nature of reality. So for some people on the qualitative side, reality is very subjective, yeah? On the quantitative side, it's black and white. So some of the times I'm a black and white person. I just see it's either wrong or right for me sometimes. And sometimes I can look through it and see something, through different lenses, right? If we're looking at the epistemology, we're looking at how do we come to know what we know, as well as we're looking from a research perspective. We're looking at the relationship that exists, for example, with the researcher and the person who is being researched. So in a very practical way, if we're doing quantitative research, many times the researcher will just go into the field, collect the data, goes out and has not much interaction with the participants, if any. While on the qualitative side, the qualitative researcher is better served if he or she has conversations and interactions with the participants. Some of it requires very close interaction, and in some instances also mean living among the participants to better understand what it is that they do. So the epistemology, so when you hear people talk about epistemology, really what it is asking for, what it is saying is that we're looking at the relationship that exists between the researcher and that person or those persons who are being researched, and just really seeking to answer the question, how do we come to know what we know? If we're thinking about the axiology, we're thinking about what's the role of our values or, or value system to a particular process. Okay. Rhetoric, well, methodology, as is suggested here. So methodology just looks at the process. So for example, if you recall last week and this week I made reference to it again, with quantitative, there is a process approach, which is more on the linear side. With qualitative, somewhat linear, but there's a recursive element, and mixed methods also has its process. The rhetoric of quantitative research does differ from qualitative. So I've read pieces of study, for example, and quantitative study, and it speaks, for example, of the researcher. So the persons who've done the research seem very distant from the research. That's kind of how quantitative researchers tend to express themselves. On the other hand, qualitative researchers will use language, for example, as I. Yeah? So it becomes more personal, more personable when you're reading the research. They speak to participants, for example, or informed participants or key participants. On the quantitative research side, the quantitative researchers will sometimes speak about the subjects. So the language does matter in both quantitative and qualitative research, and equally mixed methods. So rhetoric is really just speaking about the language that is used in the research. So just to recap, for every worldview that there is, so if we're talking about a post-positivism or post-positivist worldview, there are 5 philosophical assumptions. If we're looking at constructivism as a worldview or a lens through which we see the world, there are also 5 philosophical assumptions which are associated or which are linked to that worldview. If we're looking at it through a participatory or transformatory lens, we're also considering 5 philosophical assumptions. And if we're looking at it through a pragmatic lens, there are also 5 corresponding philosophical assumptions. So whichever the worldview or whichever the lens that you're looking at the world through, there are 5 philosophical assumptions that you can use. Is that clear? So for each for each worldview, there are 5 assumptions. These 5 assumptions that are on screen that are related to that worldview. So just look at the matrix here one more time. So what this is saying, post-positivism embraces or considers on, so post-positivism, there is an ontology, there is an epistemology, there is an axiology, there is a particular methodology, there is also a particular language that is spoken. It's the same way in qualitative research. There is a particular ontology, there is a particular epistemology, methodology, axiology, and rhetoric. And it's the same thing with mixed methods. So, for example, some of the language that is spoken in mixed methods is quite different from qualitative and quantitative research. Yeah? Earlier, somebody was talking about designs. The design for quan and qual is different from mixed. How we come to know what we know is also different, because these types of researchers, they use a combination of qual and qual, which makes the research stronger. So they have a different appreciation of the world from just using purely quantitative or purely quantitative. Right?
Sir,
Question.
the worldview that the researcher chooses, is it a personal thing?
It can be personal. I love that. It can be personal. Because, and listening, when you're doing research, you do not take yourself out of the research. So, for example, there are people who are doing research and they feel more comfortable doing qualitative research because that's what they can manage. There are some people who they're just scared of maths and all of those things, so they'll never try to do a quantitative piece of research, no matter how much, you know, it was giving them for value. They'll more go towards doing a qualitative piece of research, right? So when you're going to do research, you do not leave yourself. You carry yourself with you. So some of the times, the lens through which you see the world helps to inform and shape a particular research. What you see as a particular area of study can be different based on how you see the world. So I'm glad for that question.
See, you don't run a risk, sir, of tainting the data.
Explain that to me.
Go again?
Explain that to me.
Because remember, with the hypothesis is a guess, right?
But
With
that
your
guess,
hypothesis
that guess is informed by something, and so literature, for example, would have guided you. You just don't hypothesize out of the blue. It is informed by something that is known, that would have been observed before, and oftentimes it is you use the literature to ground that hypothesis. So so if you're noticing, earlier I said you're testing a theory, and so you must have a foundation or a base to test that theory. Huh?
Okay, sir.
Right.
I was thinking about safeguarding the thing, because maybe you want it to come out a certain, you want a certain result, and then you don't get it.
Let me follow up on that question that you've asked. And if you noted earlier, I said that quantitative research is said to be on the more objective side. Now listen to the language I'm using. It's said to be because personally, I do not think that while qualitative research is more quantitative is more objective than qualitative. To me, quantitative research is not purely objective, simply because if you're thinking about developing a questionnaire, for example, the items, for example, that are included on the questionnaire are influenced by you and are influenced by your own worldview and the lens through which you see the world. Which is why we do things like reliability testing of the instruments, right? So for me, it's not purely objective. Neither are the results, because you can cook the data and the statistics can lie, or you can actually say what you want of the statistics, right?
Yes, sir.
Equally with qualitative research, which is more on the subjective side, right? So just what the participants say, is subjective, and also how you process what they say can also be subjective. So somebody can use a particular word, and based on your training or the lens through which you're seeing that word, it means something different, right? So in qualitative research, you many times have to guard against your bias, and you also have to declare your hand.
Okay.
Meaning, if you have a particular bias against something, it's either you don't go into the research, or you have to say in the research that you have a particular bias, right? So
yes.
Whomever is reading understands your lens and your bias that you're taking things from. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So that leads me quite well into this whole discussion about ethical considerations in research, right? So, is it Titania? Titania, help us here. Just think about the word ethics. and pair it with research. Titania? Sorry, seem not to be there. Donna?
Yes, sir.
Hey, right, good. So let us talk about ethical considerations in research. So let us think about the word ethics, right? What does the word ethics suggest to you, or what does it mean to you?
Making a choice between what is right, what you think is right from what is wrong.
Okay, all right. Can you measure somebody's, or can you measure ethics? Can you seek to measure ethics?
I'm not sure about that, sir.
All right, so that's your homework.
What I don't think you can measure ethics, because what you see as right or might not necessarily be what I consider to be right.
All right, so I'm going to give you a homework. The homework is go and do a research on whether or not you can find a questionnaire that is seeking to measure ethics.
Okay.
All right. But qualitatively, you sure can actually talk to people about their ethics or the way, or their views about ethics and ethical consideration, can't you?
Yes, sir.
Right. So I could actually tell you that you will find, or you can find, instruments that actually will measure people's, ethics and your perceptions about ethics. Yeah. So you could find Likert scale items that talk about ethics, something strongly agree, strongly disagree, and sort of thing, right? Different points relating to ethics. Right? So if we're talking about ethical considerations in research, it's just so wide, so just so gigantic and out of this world, right? So Chantal, I'm gonna actually start with one area for consideration, and then you're gonna help us with some other things. So when you're doing a research, one of the things to always consider is that you should guard against disclosing who your participants are. So you should ensure that there is anonymity of your research participants, right? So Chantal.
Yes, sir.
Having said that, give us another, ethical considerations to think about in a research.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm thinking, sir.
Ah, great, man.
Yeah.
You listen, listen. If you're following the discussion, and you're looking at your PowerPoint there, you don't have to think, look at the PowerPoint.
And the first one you talked about was disclosure, right?
So, well, disclosing your participants, yes. So being anonymous, making your participants anonymous, right? So that's one.
Making sure that there's no harm, mentally, physically, no harm it's coming to any of the participants.
Explain that a little bit more for us. Give us some examples, or an example.
So I guess a questionnaire, it could be about abuse, like drug abuse or physical abuse, but you'd realize that one of your participants have been through, or they're displaying symptoms of being having challenges completing the questionnaire. You could pull that participant.
Okay. All right. So if it's a questionnaire they're filling out, you probably may not even.
Or interview.
Aha.
If you're doing an interview, right?
You may be doing an interview, and you're asking some questions, and you recognize that the participant, is starting to. So when you're doing interviews, for example, you have to observe.
Right.
And also depending on what your interview is about. So for example, the university, it has an ethics committee that actually grants approval for different types of research, and it does rank the ethical consideration or the ethics to consider. So there are some things that are considered high risk, medium risk, and low risk, right? So if you're talking to a particular participant about, it probably could be a very touchy subject, being abused, for example, you have to be very careful, yeah, because you may not be causing any physical harm, but you may then bring back all of those memories and then start, you know, a whole cycle. Some years ago, I was involved with a group doing a research in prisons, and the Ministry of Health had to give, either it was the Ministry of Health or the Ministry of, I think it was the Ministry of Justice, they had to give ethical consideration or ethical approval. And one of the things that the research team had to prove, so we're talking about HIV, the research is about HIV. And one of the things that the research team had to actually prove and put in place is, what if we started to talk to participants and they started having like flashbacks and stuff and emotional breakdown? How would we treat a situation like that? And so a part of what we actually had to write in the proposal is that we will actually seek the service of a psychologist and give the participants that option to ask for psychological help if required, and the research team or the organization would pay for that psychological intervention. So you shouldn't go in, do harm, and come back out. So it could mean physical harm, or it could mean psychological and other types of harm. Yeah? Legal harm as well. Right? All right, good.
Could I just give one little example that I heard of?
Yes.
It's the thing about trying to prevent psychological harm long term. There was one study I heard about where some children were being tested, and some children were deliberately given some wrong information, so they could not do the task, versus other children who were given the right information. And then they judged to see how the children completed the thing. And at the end of the thing, because I noticed that you're not having deception as one of the things, but sometimes the research calls for people to be given different levels of information. But what they had to do is debrief the children who were given the wrong information after. So what they went and they told the children, oh, they're so sorry that it was the equipment that went wrong and that sort of thing, because they didn't want those children to walk away and think that they were not intelligent or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. And so Olivine, I'm glad you mentioned that point, Olivine, because there is a lot of discussion around teachers, for example, doing research of that type with students, right?
Yes.
Where you have the experimental group and the control group.
Yes.
There is a lot. And so even when there's a stint when I was in the School of Education doing research, and I actually, you know, said to people, I'm not supporting those types of research, because no matter how simple it is, you are putting one set of children at a disadvantage. So by exposing one set and not exposing the other, even when you correct the situation and you expose that set eventually, the set that was exposed previously is at an advantage. So whichever way you take it, once you have a control and an experimental group, you're putting a set of children at a disadvantage, and it does not matter what. Reading, exercising, it doesn't matter what. Right? It is an approach to qualitative research but not one that many researchers sanction.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that it could, and even for adults, it could cause, you know, psychological and other harm to those people, right? Yes, there are research also that, you know, the intent is not told to the participants up front, simply because they want to see how the participants, for example, will respond. And if they told them, then they probably won't get the response that is, you know, appropriate or is natural. So, for example, if you go in a particular setting and you tell people that you're observing them, they may show what you don't want to see, or they may pretty things up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But if you go in covertly, which happens, so like one of our goodly colleague the other day when we were in a meeting spoke about going into classes and covertly observing. Yeah. Again, my question to him was whether or not eventually what he was doing was eventually disclosed. Yeah, but that's for a different a different conversation. Yeah? So it's one of the things we have to try and avoid, deception to our participants. And so usually in your research, it's part of the ethical consideration to disclose to your participants why you're doing the research and give them the option to say whether or not they want to participate, which means that they have to sign, or they should sign a consent form, or they should give consent to being a part of the research.
Or sir, when you're doing a research and you tell them that the research is gonna better them or the area that they live in, and you tell them that because you want them to participate and give you all this information, when you know that at the end of the day it's not gonna benefit them, you're just kind of collecting information, but you tell them that, oh, this research is gonna better the area, we're going to provide work, and all of these will come from the information that you give us. So just tell us everything you know, and we'll help better the area or the community.
As a researcher, you have to be careful of that. Good point. You have to be careful of that, right? And so, but as you spoke, another thing came to my mind, because you should also collect the data for the purpose that was set out and not use it for any other intention. This is a group of HR professionals and practitioners, by the way. So even though this is not necessarily directly linked to the class, but it is also useful. And what came to my mind is the Protection Disclosure Act, because even in HR, as we collect, you know, data from people, we have to make sure that what we collected the data for is what we use it for. So even like, for example, phone numbers, people collect people's phone number using people's phone number, and then they send out all sorts of other things, you know, in it. Yeah, we have to be careful about those things, but that's a sidebar. So informed consent is important. Assent for children is also important. So if your study includes children, the children have to give some assent, and not because their mothers or fathers say that they can participate. They too have a voice, and so they too should have a right to say, I want to be a part of, or I do not want to be a part of, right? So even schools, for example, is one of the things that is very touchy. And so even going through research, the Ministry of Education needs to be written to. If, for example, teachers are going into schools, researchers are going into schools, the principals have to give that go ahead, the teachers have to give that go ahead. And as a parent, this is something that you need to take note of, right? So the child should give some assent. So even in a class setting, if a research is being done and the child does not want to be a part of the research, the child has that right to say he or she does not want to be a part of it. But in a general sense, if you're doing research with a group of participants or a set of participants, they have the right to say they don't want to be a part of. And if, for example, they're doing interviews and they say, I do not want to go any further with this interview, you should not coerce them, you should not force them. Even from the beginning, and I don't remember which conversation I was in the other day, and I heard somebody almost suggesting that they're bribing somebody to be a part of the interview process. You can't do that. You shouldn't do that. So the person's participation should be free of any bias, of any coercion, which also brings me to the point of payment. There is a lot of discussion around whether or not persons should be paid to participate in research. As far as I've read, there is nothing in offering an incentive, right? Or a reward for the contribution, but it is how and when you do it. So if you do it upfront, almost like it's a bribe, so be a part of this research and I'll pay you $100,000 or $50,000. That's unethical, right? But if you ask persons to participate in a research and they say yes, and following the research, you probably say, give them gift voucher or something small, for the effort, that's fine. Because the truth is, some of the times some research processes are very long and lengthy, which takes a lot of energy, mental and otherwise, out of people.
Like a focus group.
Like a focus group some of the times, but also you get some instruments that are rather long. And when you reach halfway, you say, God, can't I finish now? Or when this going to end, kind of thing, right? While the person is so busy and have all sorts of other things to do. So in my research, for example, one of the things that the teachers told me with this thing with COVID, they said, well, tell you what, I know you want to do the observations, but we can't accommodate you now because we're gonna have to do online teaching and we're not prepared for this online thing. We're gonna have to learn and all of those things. And we don't really have the time for you now. I had to appreciate that. So I really had to back off of the teachers. Yeah? So the point I'm making there is that you have to honor, even as something as simple as time. So you agree on a particular time, be there on time. Don't take it for granted. They offer you a research, they are doing you a favor. Be there on time, thank them for the research, all of those things. But what it also, part of your ethical consideration is asking you to, when, for example, if you're doing qualitative research, ask your participants to read back whatever you've transcribed to see if you've captured the essence of what they're saying. Sometimes they may not want you to disclose some of the things that they've said, right? You also have to ensure that there's confidentiality, which is different from the anonymity, right? Again, there's a whole lot of ethical considerations because, for example, how do you safeguard the data? Do you lock it away? If it's electronic data, how do you secure it? Is it locked with passwords? So a Word document, is it you alone who has access to it? Some of us use transcription softwares. What's the accessibility of those transcripts? If we tape record, did we get permission to tape record? How long do we keep those tape recordings? All of those are parts and parcel of ethical considerations. Yeah? So it's wide. I have on screen here scientific misconduct, which I think borders on what I heard one of the participants just mentioned earlier. Skewing the data, for example. Yeah? Or do you present things that aren't necessarily true? Do you touch up the data to, you know, embellish it so it says what you want? All of those, yeah, you have to be careful of. Plagiarism, right? So these are all some of the ethical considerations to consider. I have in your set of documents shared with you this book that reads On Becoming a Scientist, and it has several examples. Let me just scroll over. It has several examples of ethical considerations or display of ethical considerations for you to think about, from plagiarism to misconduct to deceit to anonymity, payment for data, or and I've seen it, but I think my thing has disconnected. But if you go in your bundle of stuff, in your week 1 and 2 set of stuff, you will see this text on becoming a scientist. Yeah, if you're really serious about research, PhD and otherwise, or even for this course, it is a good, you know, a good read. All right. So any questions on ethical considerations?
Yes, sir. I have a question.
Yes.
So I know you mentioned that paying somebody to participate in research can be unethical. What if, say, for example, the researcher puts out an advertisement saying that they need participants for a particular research, and each participant will be paid, say, $5,000. Is that unethical? Is it seen as, I mean, I know it's an encouragement for persons to participate, but is it unethical, seeing that they were transparent and people had a choice? I mean, it's an ad. They didn't go up to the persons to say, hey, I'm going to pay you this if you participate in the research.
So that piece about it is an ad and they choosing to, I can understand, because even though they say $5,000, you can choose to say whether you want or not, right? I've seen in randomized controlled trials, for example, that they offer things to the participants, right? And it may not necessarily be money, but they offer products, for example. So if you're sampling, you know, toothpaste, for example, you know, you get samples of toothpaste or toothbrushes and all of those things, right? Which comes with a thing. So it's a very touchy and sensitive topic. What is useful to know, though, is that there shouldn't be that impression that you are wooing the participant to the research with money or any sort of, you know.
I think that what might be important there is that the reward is not tied to the answers that I give. So,
right.
For example,
or your participation.
Yes. So suppose I'm a prisoner or I'm a person on welfare or something, and I decide not to take part in your study. I mustn't feel that I'll lose my benefits, or I won't have somebody on visiting day or something
Good.
like that, you know?
Good. And so again, if we think about another form, so we have people, for example, doing trials and stuff. It could be food trials or other things, right? Which is some form of research as well. And so comes with it is some form of, it may not be payment in the form of money, but as I said, some products. So we many times see people, for example, you know, on the road and they're doing some tests and they say, try this kind of thing, and you may get free samples and all of that. So you're right, Olivine. It is what is being conveyed, and is it that if I don't participate, then I'm going to be at risk of losing something or
if
you
my
know, I'm going
answer
to
is
lose a
not what you
relation.
want to hear, if my answer is not what you want to hear, that,
Right.
But you see, the thing about advertising could be part of the research design. So for instance, I heard about a study where the people advertised that they wanted a certain kind of person to come forward. People who liked adventure and all sorts of things, but they gave something. But the idea is that they were studying something like extroversion or something like that. And if you responded to the ad saying that you were that kind of person, then you were actually the kind of person that they were looking for. Yes. So that is because that was what they were studying. So the ad, it depends on what you wanted to do with the ad. But you don't want to, the reward is not the end, I think. That's not the reason for it.
And so the message here is that do not try and use reward as a catch for persons to participate in a research.
But
or a disincentive.
Okay. But sir, hello?
Yes, I'm hearing.
Locally, the Blue Dot Research Company, they offer an incentive that you can redeem for cash, you know. So when you sign up,
I don't know about that. Tell me about it. I don't know.
You know Blue Dot, the newest researchers on the market here in Jamaica?
Yeah. But what do they do?
So you can sign up with them on in a community, right? As part of their database of participants. And each time you participate in a survey, you accumulate points. And at some point in time, you can redeem those points for cash. So I remember when they were looking, was it Jasmine Dean? They were looking for, and the participants who were in the Blue Dot community was redeeming their points for cash to donate to the quest to find Jasmine Dean.
Aha, so notice.
Because generally, you know, people don't like participating in a survey. So Blue Dot now offers an incentive where you're a part of a community. You may not answer every survey you get, but it is an incentive that when you do participate, you accumulate these points.
Right.
That you
but
can
you notice, they said they donated it.
Yes, you can opt to donate it to a cause, but you can also cash it in.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think the difference with that though is that your answers to each individual questionnaire that you participate in is not affected by the money. It may be that you do
it's your participation.
Yes, but the number of surveys you enter might be what you're after with this money, but it's not the answer. And so that's what I'm saying, is that I think that it doesn't bias any individual survey that you're in.
Or the result, right?
The result of each individual survey is not biased by you being paid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because for instance, think about it. This is why some people might not like a cigarette company paying for a medical trial. Because if it came out that cigarette kills you, then people might want to suppress that if they're selling cigarettes. So the answers that you give would be biased by the fact of the people paying for the study or something like that. The fact that money is being passed will influence the answers given. That is what is different with what you're talking about.
Good for that. Thanks for that, Olivine. Thanks for that. Okay. So as I've mentioned, do some reading, you know, on that book there that speaks about, you know, the ethical considerations surrounding research. It's a wide expanse of case studies, and the suggested, you know, responses are also there. Right? I want to talk a little bit about data sources, data information sources for your research, because I think that's very important. And earlier when I was asking, somebody mentioned about where she found the source for construct and concept, right? So let me ask a question. If you were doing a research, a piece of research, what is, and Daniel, this question is going to be for you, what is the least preferred data source that is suggested that you use? So we have among the data sources, books, websites, journal articles, conference papers, you name it. Which is the least preferred that you could use or you should use if you're contemplating doing a piece of research?
The least preferred option for conducting research would be just data from unreliable or unreliable sources. So
personalize that unreliable sources for me. How do you define
unreliable sources? For example, tabloids, or information that you think is skewed.
So information that you think is skewed. What about the thoughts of others? Meaning, when I say thoughts of others, meaning information that is out there that tells you that this is not a reliable source.
Right, you can always check on persons who dispute theories and the information that they supply as to why this theory might not be practical or might not be what the researcher would say it is.
Okay, I'm gonna come back to that. Ramona?
Yes, sir.
Could you share your thoughts on that question that I just asked? So if we're thinking about textbooks, conference papers, dissertations, websites, newspaper articles, journal articles and stuff, which would you consider the least, reliable of the sources for research?
From the list that you gave me, I would say maybe a website, but it all depends on the type of website.
What do you mean by that?
Because not all information shared on some websites can be utilized. So for example, when you think doing a research and you're quoting a Wikipedia, that would not be a reliable source to involve in your research.
Why do you think so, Ramona? So we love Wikipedia so much. So you're shooting on Wikipedia?
For Wikipedia?
Hey.
All right. Persons may look at Wikipedia and might just give you an idea, but then again, anybody can go in and edit information and put something out there. So you need something that is more reliable.
Mm-hmm. So I like that the use of that term. It gives you an idea, right? So
yes.
the point here is not to say you cannot use Wikipedia, right?
Yes.
Because different views can contend, and it's nice to see, what people are saying, because I find that a useful point to critique and to say this are rubbish, this don't make no sense, or this makes some sense, but the conclusion is not logical or stuff, right? So, you know,
Yes.
that Wikipedia allows or stimulates that critical thinking. Can I trust this?
Yes.
Is this credible? Yeah. Kind of
That's
thing.
the next question.
Is this credible? And so as researchers, you have to put on that critical thinking cap. So even some of the things that I'm telling you, I would tell you, don't take all of it for gospel. Go and read, go and research for your own. I am really just facilitating a conversation with you to stimulate your thought process for you to now go and read and to see if some of the things I'm telling you make sense or I'm just making them up as I go along.
Yes.
So Noblet.
Yes.
So if you're to go on the other end, what are some of the sources that you would consider, you know, better to use in a research?
So maybe scientific evidence to assist with research, credible sources of data, past research, information.
I'm glad you're mentioning that in a Noblet, because I was just going to ask you, what are all of those things you're talking about? So I was going to ask you to tell me, you know, what is it that you're talking about, credible sources and all of that? Give me some examples.
So I think in our last module, we had to do a research paper.
Wow.
So
how did that go? all right.
Question. Anyway, so the sources of data that I used were information from what do you call them? Authors or scientists who had conducted some kind of study before and used that as a basis for some of the research information. So notable authors, notable scientists who would have done some work in the field already.
And what area of focus, what was your area of focus?
It was researching training methodologies and impact on learning.
Okay. And so if you remember, we spoke about theories, and theories are also linked to learning and training. Yeah?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
models, for example, right? So,
Yes.
so at any point, did you do any database search?
Database?
Did you search any database?
Did I? I don't think I did. No.
How did you find your information? The stuff you used?
All right, so some of the information locally I found on government website like Ministry of Education and the work that they were doing as it relates to training methods and education and the secondary school curriculum, that kind of thing. So government paper, that kind of thing I'd used.
Okay. At any point, did you search for any journal articles?
Yes.
Great. How did you search for those journal articles? What was the source? Where did they come from?
The World Wide Web.
The World Wide Web.
Google Scholar.
Scholar, okay. Only that alone?
Sorry, I think I searched very wide. UE site, Salises, UE library, UE links.
So I'm asking these questions, and sorry sorry for seeming to probe, to be probing and, you know, passing in business and stuff.
Oh man, probe away.
But be careful, be careful. But why I'm asking these questions, you know, is to help the rest of the class to see that as we talk about research, we have to be mindful about our information sources. So there's, you know, primary data source and there's secondary data source, right? So just recently I was watching a video and this lady was talking about, you know, when she examines papers, for example, what are the sources that she looks for? And she says, if, for example, she sees, so she was talking about PhD people, and she was saying, if, for example, she sees her candidates using books, it's one of the big turnoffs for an examiner, because books are considered primary sources, right? So the first thing that she looks at is a reference list to see what were the sources, because she's looking for primary sources, right? I said books are primary sources earlier.
Yes.
No, books are secondary sources. So things like journal articles, right? So journal articles, thesis, completed dissertations, for example, right? Conference papers and stuff. Those are more cutting edge research, right? And so those are the things that you want to go for. So in trying to put the icing on the cake for this dissertation I'm doing, so I had to make my final submission, well, not my final, my draft submission to my supervisor on Monday. And over the weekend, I sat down, so I'm focusing on emotion regulation, and I sat down and looked back. So throughout the journey, I was looking back on what was happening as I researched. And over the weekend, I sat down and I looked for the most current stuff. And I found stuff up to 2000. I think up to about July 2000. And I said, voila. And one of the things I found was this whole idea or concept, construct around digital emotion regulation. And I said to myself, wow.
Sorry, July 2000 or July 2020?
2020, I should say.
Oh, because...
I mean, no, sorry. 2020, right now. And I said, wow, right? Because what this says, and it opened up my eyes to something that I actually saw in the research, but never thought of it through that lens. So what this whole thing of digital emotion regulation is saying is that now we're doing wearables, and so there can be apps, or there could be apps, just like we have apps that actually are measuring health and all of those things. There could be apps, so there's a partnership with psychologists, educational psychologists and other psychologists and computer scientists to determine how do we enhance wearables to have data captured on emotion regulation. And I said, wow. So that for me, incorporating that, it said, you know, it's a part of me being current with the literature. I didn't find it in a book. I found it in a journal article. So the sources you want to go to are your journal articles, your conference papers, conference proceedings, dissertations, right? Less of your textbooks, as Ramona said correctly. Well, I'm going to say less of the Wikipedia, because the Wikipedia and all of those things, you just read them to kind of help to stimulate your thought, but you're not going to focus on those things in your citation and all of those things. So do not, for example, cite any Wikipedia and all of those things. I'd ask about databases, right? Because having an appreciation of different databases will help you to find some of those journal articles that you're looking for. So there is a whole community out there and a whole discussion around the paid databases that you actually have to, you know, pay to get articles from versus open access databases where you can get free literature from. So on Sunday, I was doing some work and I saw where somebody was making the comment, for example, that ResearchGates, you know, you have to now think through about the things that are found on ResearchGates, right? And it opened my eyes again to the whole thing of the credibility of the stuff that you find. Because ResearchGates is open access, as is some others, right? That you can go and you can find information. I happen to have gone to a website just looking and found a university in Australia. I don't remember the university's name, but had access to their database and tell you, I was like in heaven, because I could find just about any article. Well, let me not say any article, but a lot of the articles, cutting edge articles in the database, and it was just open. And I said to myself, as compared to US database, which some of the times, if you're not on the campus, you cannot get access to, right? But what it said to me is that even some of the paid articles, I was able to go there and find some of them, right? So the point for raising this is you have to search, you have to know where to find your sources. The UL library can help you. There are several databases that are available, right? All you need to do is to go and speak to the librarian, and the librarian will help you to find articles based on what you're looking for. Again, if you're not certain, so I've learned to use it and it's very intuitive, right? But if you're not certain, the librarian can actually give you a walkthrough of how to use the database. I remember there's ones that I didn't know quite clearly how to use ProQuest, for example, and the librarian is very kind in walking me through how to use it. And I've found much utility from using that database. Yeah. Question. I hear a question there.
Yeah, I was asking you how do you search for your articles on the web?
So I go to, so there's some databases. I use ResearchGates. I use ProQuest, but ProQuest I have to get access to from the university. Okay. I use regular Google Scholar. There is a mixed methods database that I have access to. There's a site, the APA, for example, has a database, right? So they're different, right? But for you and interestingly, I found a lot of journal articles by searching regular Google, right? But I've come to recognize that there's some techniques in finding some of these journal articles, even some of the ones that are you have to subscribe for, right? So some of them I end up not paying for them, but based on how I search for them and I dig and I dig and I dig, I get access to them without have to paying for them, right? So normally what I do is that, take for example, I'm looking for emotion regulation, and I'm looking for teachers emotion regulation. I may write emotion regulation, comma, teacher, and a comma, and PDF. I usually have great success when I'm searching for something and type comma, PDF. It brings up different journal articles for me. So that comma PDF brings up a lot of journal articles.
Okay.
So that is one strategy. So if I'm looking for employee satisfaction in the Caribbean, I look employee satisfaction, Caribbean, employee satisfaction, comma, Caribbean, comma, PDF, search. Or if I'm looking for Employee engagement, I look at employee engagement, comma, PDF. If I want to narrow it down, I look for employee engagement, comma, Jamaica, comma, PDF, and look. So that's a part of how I search for things. And I've found much utility. In fact, when I go back to search the databases, I will also find some of the articles that I found this way. So many times when I go and search the databases, a lot of the articles that I've already found just using regular Google, I see them back in the database and I said to myself, oh, I have this already, I don't need that again. I've read that already.
One of the things that you might find is that you find a draft of the person's work. So they could have put a draft somewhere and have the full article elsewhere. So you put the date in citing the article, you put the date of the version of the article that you're using, and that would suffice.
Yeah. So later down in the discussion, we're gonna probably have some more conversation around your citation and stuff, right? Well, as you do this stuff, because when you get to the point of doing your research practicum, what you will have to do is to send it to me, and I will look through it for you and point out some things, right, that you need to do, you need to consult and stuff. Yeah. Your citation is important. Very, very important. Your referencing and your citation is important. As with other things in your paper, so your general presentation of the paper does matter. The font, the spacing, your alignment of the paper, yeah? But your in-text citation, your referencing, your quotations, paraphrasing, all of those things do matter when you're researching, right? So a year ago, we're in September now, it was October of last year, the American Psychological Association published the 7th edition of the style guide, the APA style guide. There are several citation styles that are afforded to persons who do research. So there is the MLA, there's APA, there is Chicago, there's Harvard. I know the persons who do law, they have their own citation styles. The engineers have their own citation style. Medicine, for example, have their own. And you know, so there's several citation styles. For the soft disciplines, it is usually APA. So if it's psychology, psychology, education, social sciences to a certain extent, human resource, because human resource is a soft, you know, discipline. APA is usually preferred citation style. Olivine, since you're on, because I know which is this citation style that the faculty tends to use. I know in
the
education,
faculty tends to use Chicago, but we in the HRD unit and the psychology unit, we use APA.
Because of this soft nature of HR and the link with HR and
psychology.
Right. So I think the OB people also use APA, right?
Yes, they do. Yes.
Right, because it's psychology based, right? And there's a strong link with HR and the psychology as well, right? So our citation style is the American Psychological Association citation style. Please take note that we have moved away from the 6th edition to the 7th edition. There are some, there are some changes in the 7th edition that I like. So for example, in the 6th edition, there's confusion around how to label, you know, your tables and figures and charts and stuff. It's much more simple. Your headings, for example, it's much more simple. One of the things that I took note of, So normally in writing APA 6th edition, you give 2 spaces after the full stop. Now, just a space is required. So seemingly simple things like those that will make a difference to your research is changed in the 7th edition. There is a lot of focus also around again, ethical considerations, both in terms of gender, ethnicity, things like those. So there's a whole chapter around ethical considerations in the citation style, in the citation guide. I have an version, a PDF version, which somebody sent to me. I don't know how the person got it, so I don't want to circulate it. But what I'd say is that, and I think your colleague last week, one of your colleagues last week, posted in the chat a link to Purdue Howl. I found that to be very useful. So if you want, so somebody chance and I want to find something, I go to Purdue Howl, and it actually helps me to pretty much find anything that you can find in the style guide, right? So that's a useful thing to go and do, to look in the style guide and see if you can actually, you know, find some information around citing using the 7th edition. Let me just see if I can find a video for you that helps to give you a sense of what are some of the changes in the 7th edition. So here Jessica has a nice video on the changes that have been made in the 7th edition. Are you seeing my screen?
Yeah.
Right. So here's Jessica with a brief enough video on what are some of the changes in the 7th edition.
In October 2019, the American Psychological Association introduced the 7th edition of the APA Publication Manual, which replaces the 6th edition published back in 2009. In this video...
Are we hearing her?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. We're hearing her.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
Sir.
We'll go over the 17 most notable changes on citing sources, formatting paper, and writing inclusively and bias-free. Hi, I'm Jessica from Scribber, here to help you achieve your academic goals. Let's start with the most notable changes in citing sources. Number 1. The publisher location is no longer included in the reference. The publisher, in this example Simon & Schuster, is placed right after the book title, without including the city and state New York. Number 2. The in-text citation for works with 3 or more authors is now shortened right from the first citation using et al. In the 6th edition, sources with 3, 4, or 5 authors were given in full the first time the source was mentioned. Number 3. You should include surnames and initials for up to 20 authors in the reference list. In the 6th edition, it was up to 7. Number 4. The label DOI: is no longer necessary. DOIs are now formatted as URLs. Number 5. You no longer need to write retrieve from in front of the URL, unless a retrieval date is needed. You now also include the website name, unless it's the same as the author. Number 6. For ebooks, the format, platform, or device, for example, Kindle, is no longer included in the reference. Number 7. Clear guidelines are provided for including contributors other than authors and editors. For example, if you want to cite this video, make sure to include Scribber as the author. Number 8. Dozens of examples are included for online source types such as podcast episodes, YouTube videos, and social media posts. The 7th edition of the APA Publication Manual includes guidelines on inclusive and bias-free language for topics such as gender, age, disability, racial and ethnic identity, and sexual orientation. Number 9. The singular they or their is endorsed as a gender-neutral pronoun. Instead of saying he or she, you're encouraged to say they. Number 10. Instead of using adjectives as nouns to label groups of people, descriptive phrases are preferred. So instead of saying the poor, you should say people living in poverty. Number 11. Instead of broad categories, you should use exact age ranges that are more relevant and specific. So use people in the age range of 65 to 75 years old instead of over 65. The APA also provided different paper format guidelines for professional and student papers. You can find a sample paper for both types in the manual. Some of the format changes include number 12, increase flexibility regarding fonts. Options include Calibri 11, Arial 11, Lucida Sans Unicode 10, Times New Roman 12, and Georgia 11. Number 13. The running head on the title page no longer includes the word running head. It now contains only a page number and the paper title. Number 14. The running head is omitted in student papers, unless your instructor tells you otherwise. Number 15. Heading levels 3 to 5 are updated to improve readability. For level 3, instead of indenting, it's now flush left and also italicized. Level 4 headings are no longer italicized. A level 5 heading is now bolded. In terms of style, not much has changed, but there are 2 changes you should know about. Number 16. Use only one space after a period at the end of the sentence. Number 17. Use double quotation marks to refer to linguistics examples instead of italics. So when will people start using the 7th edition APA manual? The APA expects that people will start using the 7th edition in the spring of 2020, but make sure you check with your supervisor or journal publisher which edition you should adhere to. The manual is now available in full color. You can choose between a hardcover, spiral bound, or ebook. If you're interested in getting yourself a copy, check the link in the description. That's it for this video. Make sure you give this video a like, and if you have any questions about the new changes, ask away in the comments. See you soon!
All right, take care, Jessica. All right, so that's really just a preview of what the style guide is asking us to do now, right? So the university, for example, I think starting this semester is asking that projects and other papers be submitted using the 7th edition of the style guide rather than the 6th. So if you're handing in papers, for example, you're asked to transition and to start using the 7th edition. I'm pointing this out because, for example, when you write your paper for your coursework for this course, and also when you write your papers for other coursework in this course going forward, you should actually use the 7th edition of the style guide and not the 6th edition. So the 6th edition is through the window, it's the 7th edition. So for example, I've seen people submit projects and they have nice fancy cover pages and it look very pretty and stuff. No, your alignment of the paper needs to be left aligned, not justified, left aligned. Your paper should be double spaced. You've seen earlier where they have now moved from Times New Roman 12 to other font sizes, right? But you have to use one of those that are recommended. So what APA does is that it helps you to gain sharper focus, and it actually helps to increase your attention to detail. That's what using APA does for me, right? In some instances, it contradicts what we're accustomed to in everyday use of British language, right? Or writing British, right? In writing British, right? So for example, there's this concept of seriation in the style guide. So if, for example, you are saying different modes of transportation and you're saying motorbikes, comma, boats, comma, and aeroplane, that's what APA requires. Normally when you're writing, we say motorbikes, comma, motorbikes, comma, boats, and airplanes, without putting a comma before the word and. In APA, for example, that's something that is required. So some of those seeming simple things, when you're doing, for example, your tables, so if you're presenting tables, for example, APA now requires, or charts, or figures, APA now requires that you label it on top. But tables in particular, you're not required to use a lot of lines. So oftentimes we have tables and we have those nice, dark, defined lines. APA requires very much simplicity. And so it asks for a line at the bottom, a line at the top, and probably just a line underneath the heading. And that's it. Very, very simple, very, very basic. I haven't gone through the style guide in its entirety to find out if they are now accepting color, for example, for your figures. But I know before, all your figures had to be grayscale or black and white, not color, right? So those were some of the seeming, you know, unattractive things that people didn't like, but a part of it was to encourage standardization in the paper that you presented, right? As Olivine has posted here in the chat, information about the APA style guide Purdue Hall, right? That's a good way of checking out what you need to, how you source. So whether it is your book chapter, whether it is your journal article, a podcast, a YouTube video. So take note.
Sourcing and formatting, even the page of your projects, they have a style for that.
Yes. That's important. Where the page goes, the page number goes. We're accustomed to having the page number at the bottom, but APA, the page number goes at the top right-hand corner of each page, right? So there are many things. Earlier it spoke about, so this is one of the things I had to go through in my research and change. Earlier it spoke, give me 1 minute, my going. So earlier in the video you would have seen them talk about the number of authors. So before, if you had 3 or more, or 3 authors, for example, you would have to list the first 3. Now, if you have 3 or more authors, you use, in the first instance, you use et al. So only when you have a single author or 2 authors, then you use back those 2 names. But once it is 3 or more, you use et al. At the beginning, when you're writing or referencing those persons. Take note as well, and I encourage you to go back and read it and watch that video. Take note, for example, when you're doing your in-text citation, and there's a difference with your reference list. The reference goes to the back, and in APA you use what is known as a reference and not a bibliography. With your in-text citation, that's what goes in the body of the work, right? All you're required to do is to use or to cite the author's name and the year of the publication. What distinguishes it from another type of citation style, though, is the comma. So in APA, you would use, for example, Macala, comma, 2020 as part of your in-text citation. So you would be saying, according to Macala so-and-so, according to Macala 2020 so-and-so, or you make a particular statement and then attribute that to McCullough at the end. So you have what is known as a signal phrase, where you start with the author and you can actually end a particular phrase or statement with referencing or giving the in-text citation to the author. The approach differs. I would say the better way, or the way I like to do it, is to not use a signal phrase, because if you use a signal phrase, what it actually is suggesting is that you're not using your voice. So you're pretty much paraphrasing what somebody else has said, or you're putting forward the researcher's voice. So if you say McCullough 2020 pointed out that X, Y, and Z, right? You're really giving voice to the researcher, right? As opposed to saying, for example, there has been an increased spike in COVID, you know, that has been observed, so and so and so, and then you attribute, you know, some reference at the end to somebody. What that actually shows is that it is your voice and you're substantiating that which you are saying with somebody else's work, right? So usually having the in-text citation at the end, or the name or the reference at the end, is a better approach than actually having it at the beginning. One other thing to note, and just listen and then you can go back and look, or let me find an example of it. Let me just go back to, or let me see if I can use the same example that Olivine had. Reference in APA. Just give me 1 minute. There's something I'm checking for, because this is important as you write. Oh, that's a reference list. I don't want a reference list. All right, let me search for in-text citation. That's better. Are you seeing my screen as I'm searching? Are you seeing my screen as I'm searching?
No.
Okay. Let me share the screen while I'm searching, so you can actually see what I'm doing. Are you seeing it now?
Yeah. Oh God.
So yeah, you soon get to go to your bed. Somebody seemed tired there, man. All right, so this is what I was saying earlier. So this is an example of a signal phrase, right? So here, Stein 2018 studied, notice past tense, studied, right? And here's a quotation. Well, it's a quotation, it's a this person paraphrased, right? But take note, this ampersand sign, when so this is an example of an in-text citation. So here we have 2 examples of in-text citation. This was done by one author. In this instance, Tang and Pierce, 2 authors, wrote this piece of work in 2014, right? What I actually want to point out is that in an instance like this, you actually have an ampersand sign in between these 2 names. If it were outside the bracket, you would use the word and. So it could be Tang and Pierce, open bracket, 2014, close bracket, right? So when you have the in-text citation in the bracket, you use the ampersand sign. Outside of the bracket, you are going to use the word and. That's an important thing. I see people mix it up all the time, right? So that's something to note. Here is the actual reference. So note, this is a journal article. And how do I know? Well, it says journal, but I usually look at the end portion here, and I know whether it's a journal article or a book, right? So the surname, so note, in the in-text citation, it is just the surname and the year. This page number is actually here because usually you see the page number if it's a direct quote. It is paraphrased here, but usually with paraphrase, you also can indicate the page number. Here in the reference list though, you include the surname, the first letter of the person's Christian name, and in some instances, if both Christian name and middle name is used, the first letter of the Christian name as well as the middle name, right? The year comes next. Now take note of where the punctuations are because those matter. The name, this is the name of the article. So Alzheimer's disease in young adults, that's the name of the article. The journal, the name of the journal is Journal on Aging. Now take note that the journal, the name of the journal is italicized, as well as this 14 here. And this represents the page number of the journal, right? Now earlier, Jessica spoke about DOI. So before 2016, not 2016, before the 7th edition, this is how you would present the DOI. And the DOI stands for the Digital Object Identifier. So if you can recognize or appreciate a book, before we had what is known as ISBN, that was a unique identity, or still is a unique identifier for a book. For a journal article, there are what is known as digital object identifiers, which are unique identifiers to a journal article. So just like your license plate, it's unique, your TRN, it's unique to you. An article that was written also gets a unique identifier. There's actually a database for searching these. So if you noted earlier, Jessica said that the URL is now added. So when you're referencing, you would actually have to add https://doi.org/ and then the DOI, right? You may not have caught all of that, but again, if you go to Purdue Howl, you should see all of these things. I'm pointing them out because they're going to be very important as you write. So you're doing this research course because it should enhance what you do. Hold on. Let me not miss this point. Let me not miss this point because it came back up in the research practicum, and good enough, the students were honest. They were honest to say that some of these things that we're talking about now, they did go through them, but they have forgotten them. So one of the students asked, and it was a lecturer who asked, so did you do these things in your research methods class? So one of the things they had to do was, for example, do the research and then present verbatim notes, extracts of what they found, and some of them struggled. And the lecturer asked, didn't you do these things in research? And they said, yes, but we don't remember. Good enough that they said that, right? I know you're gonna say the same thing, right? So I'm pointing it out to say that pay attention to some of these things, because when it comes back to your practicum, you are going to need them. I saw in some instances my practicum students ask me things, and I said, luckily I taught them research, and I said, well, you know, we spoke about this, you know, already, or you had an assignment to go and research this. So that's the point I'm making, that some of these things are going to come back up. All right, I heard some questions.
Sir, earlier you said something about citing at the beginning. I kind of missed it. What you said?
Okay. So what you have what is known as a signal phrase. So here's an example of a signal phrase, right? So you start the sentence with the in-text citation. So Stein 2008 indicated or studied, right? And I'm saying that here is another example where the in-text citation ends the sentence, right?
Yeah.
In this example of Stein studied, in a sense, you are giving voice to Stein, right? My preferred approach is to use this one where the reference or the in-text citation comes at the end, because what it actually shows the reader is that you've read whatever, you've paraphrased it, you've made sense of what is being said, and you are presenting your own interpretation of this thing. But even in doing that, you are using what Stein and Peirce has said. So you're paraphrasing what Stein has said, or Stein, not Stein, Tang and Peirce has said, right? And you essentially put it in your own words, right? So that's a better way of presenting your information.
Put it in your own words and then put that at the end.
Right. So
it's where you got the info.
Right. So earlier we spoke about ethical consideration, and this is a very big ethical consideration. In fact, the university don't skin up about it, right? Which is why in your orientation and other things, you would have actually learned about plagiarism and submitting your work through Turnitin and stuff. The university does not play with plagiarism. It has an integrity to maintain, and equally it sees its students or its participants as persons of integrity. So when you draw on other people's work, you must give credit to them for their work. Claro? It's important.
Sometimes they read a lot of stuff and you can't remember exactly. You probably just write something and it is automatically a quote without realizing it, and you don't remember where you got it from.
So listen, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there are softwares, for example, that help you. EndNote is one that comes to mind. Another one is Zotero. But EndNote, for example, you can go to the library and get it. So the library has tutorials for using EndNote. You can go to MITS, and MITS installs it on your machine for you. It helps you with organizing your citation and your in-text citation and your referencing, your reference list. I don't use it particularly, but I know how to use it, because as I've seen, so I know how to reference, right? You have to know what you're looking for. So when EndNote gives you back the results, you have to know what the results ought to be, right? And know whether or not it is done properly. But what EndNote does is that, so take for example, if you're doing a project now and you found a journal article, you can actually reuse that journal article if it is relevant in another piece of work. So EndNote really stores all of those for you and allow you to reuse them, right? So there are ways of actually helping you to organize your work, right? And also not plagiarize as you go along. And a useful strategy, and I'm glad you mentioned that as well, because people oftentimes get lost by the way, or at the end, they find stuff, but they don't know where they find it. My strategy has always been, once I find something, I reference it same time and add it to the document. You can't go wrong. You cannot go wrong, because if you ever want to find it back, go right back to your reference list and you will find it. Don't use any quotation or anything like that, and then don't reference it, and then when you're looking for it, you say, but where did I find this again? Because tell you what, you are going to have to exclude it from your work. If you do not have it in your reference list, so if you put it in the in-text citation and you do not have it in your reference list, you're in trouble. And if you have it in the reference list and you do not have it as an in-text citation, you're also in trouble. So when I mark for those things. I look in the body and I look in the reference list simultaneously. So if you have an in-text citation, I'm flipping to the reference list to see if I see the reference. And I'm looking at the reference to see if you've missed any of the in-text citation. The two things should actually match. I also look for correct spelling of names. So you may want to spell Makala, but leave out one of the L's or one of the A's. If you do leave out one of the letters of the alphabet, is a different person you're referencing. Yeah? If you leave out the name of the journal, if you spell the name of the journal wrong, if you spell the title, anything in the title incorrectly, any slight mistake, it's wrong. So which is why I'm saying that APA referencing and all of those things, it actually calls for attention to detail. And it is something that it grows in us. It grows in us. It don't come overnight. I don't know it all. I've learned it over a period of time. And it is painful. It is painful. But let me tell you one of the things, and I said to my research, my practicum group the other day, you see, when you know this thing, it helps you even with your work, the work that you do in your everyday. And it is not referencing and stuff, but what it does is that it sharpens your eyes to look for things that you never looked for before. So if, for example, you're somebody who never focused on details, in practicing your referencing and recognizing that you will feel pain when you're doing it, because it's not always easy, but understanding that it is calling on you to hone a particular skill. When you actually hone that skill, it is nice to have. I've seen how referencing, for example, has helped me. One of my supervisors, my co-supervisor, she is like an APA guru. So when I'm presenting anything to her, I make sure that it is APA sound. And so what that does is that I have to also try and know APA like the back of my hand. Yeah? While one is not so APA focused or APA set, the other one is, and she picks up every single thing that is correcting if it requires APA. Yes, somebody's saying, sir.
Yes, sir. I have a question.
Yeah.
All right. So earlier when you spoke about the DOI and the new edition putting HTT before it. My question is, I read somewhere before that if you found the article on a website, on a website, I guess you would call it. Sorry, no, let me start over. That you can't use the DOI unless you found the the article in the journal itself. If you found the article on a website, then you have to use the website. Can you clarify that? Help me to understand.
I have not come across that, so that is another thing I need to write down to do some research on. I know before you could actually quote the website, right? But what I've seen in my personal experience is that you may find the article on a website, and when you go back and you're trying to find it, it may have been pulled down or stuff, right? But if, for example, you use HTTPS and stuff and search using the DOI, you can actually find that article in several databases, right? So once the article, so if the article exists in 10 databases, that one search actually pulls it or shows you that it can be found in several databases.
So even though you search on by the internet and not from a journal itself.
The physical journal?
Yes, you can use the DOI.
One of the things I've actually come to recognize is that and it's a question I've actually asked myself, because in some instances, even personally, I have actually used the physical journal, right? As opposed to the DOI, or as opposed to searching for it online. Again, I do not know that response. I don't know it. So it's something I'm going to have to.
I read that when I was doing the same research paper Noblet spoke about.
I'm going to do some research on it myself. So thanks for raising that. I don't know the answer, honestly. So I've made a note of it. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
So, Trisha Gay, my right hand.
Yes, sir.
I'm a left-hander, so I'm not giving you my left hand. You're my right hand, right? So that's one other thing to remind me that I need to, while I'm writing them down, just to do a research on DOI. If we found the article from a journal, a physical journal versus an online journal. Physical versus online journal. Use of DOI. Okay, I have noted that. Okay. All right, yeah, somebody said they want a break here. All right, I think it's a good time for us to end the class. It's 7:43, 8:43, right? So I'm gonna end here, yeah. So you can, you know, catch up on your sleep and your dinner and other things that you need to do. I am going to, so please look out for your readings for next week. Next week when you come, I'm going to talk. I was supposed to do literature review in this discussion. So we're going to touch on literature review next week and then move forward. So for next week, we're going to talk about analyzing. So in fact, next week we're going to, so these 2 weeks were just really general discussions. Next week we're going to really touch on or start talking or focusing on quantitative research. And we're going to spend 3 weeks talking about quantitative research. Then we're going to spend the next 3 weeks talking about qualitative, and then the final section talking about mixed methods. So next week when it comes, the focus is going to be on quantitative research, right? So I'm going to send your individual readings. Those individual readings, what I will do is that I will give persons a chance to say what they have gathered from their readings and to seek clarification. Please note that your participation will now start to go towards your 5% grade, your 5% in-class grade. Next week when I come, please remind me to also begin to walk you through the project. It's important for you to start looking at the project. So last week I asked you to look at the project. Next week when I come back, I'm going to actually start explaining to you what is required of the project so you can start wrapping your minds around it from now. I will encourage you to start the project from now. As I would say, by the time you quit, November comes. So I don't want you to be panicking when November comes. I want you to be in a place where you would have started your close to finish, nearer to the end of your course. Okay? You're gonna have exams to contend with as well. So just be mindful of all of that. Yeah? All right. So adios until next week. Take care now.
You're gonna send the PowerPoint slides?
Yes, so I'm going to send them. But one of the things I say, the PowerPoints are really just guides. What I really want you to do is to engage your readings. You get a lot more out of the readings than the PowerPoints.
Does it help to guide our readings, sir?
Well, let me answer that question a different way. If you look on the course outline, what I've deliberately done for you is to tell you what are the suggested readings per each week. So that should better guide your reading. So for every week, the course outline tells you which article from this bundle that you have to read.
Okay.
So the PowerPoint is really just to have, yeah, but some of it you also find in the same article that you're reading.
Okay.
Right? But I will send it nevertheless.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
Thanks.
Yeah, man.
Mr. O'Connor, just a quick question. So the competencies part of the course outline, that is actually the article headings, or is it just topics within?
I didn't hear that. I didn't hear
I'm
that.
saying on the course outline, there's a competencies heading. Those are names of articles that we should read. Is that what you're saying?
Of course, outline. So on the course outline on page 5, where it says reference materials and readings. So it gives you a website and it says preferred text. Then over the other page, which is page 6, it starts to weekly reading. And it says week 1, week 2. Is that what you're looking at?
Sir, I don't know how I missed that one, so thank you.
Right. So there's a document that actually tells you the objectives of the course. It has my email contact on it. It also has a grid that tells you what are the things we're covering in the different weeks. Oh, I see the word competence that you're talking about. So where you have course schedule, that's what you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm not sure how, but I didn't see the section of the course outline that actually said weekly.
Look further beyond that.
Yes, I see it now.
Right.
I see it now.
Right. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Come on.
Sir, I had sent you an email, sir. You haven't gotten a response as yet. I just asked you to just look on that for me, all right, sir?
This is Lorenzo?
Yes, sir.
All right. So let me just try and do it when I'm done here.
Okay, sir.
All right. When you sent it, Lorenzo?
I believe it was last week, Monday.
Last week, Tuesday. Last Tuesday.
Tuesday, all right. Yeah, it's the way of the world, Lorenzo. So when I come off this call with you, when I come off this thing, so tomorrow I'm head of section, and tomorrow I have we have retreat, corporate planning retreat. So I literally am gonna have to sit up almost much of the night to finish preparing. But I'm presenting tomorrow. So that's kind of how the world runs, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it has to be done. So we just have to talk, okay?
Yeah.
I look at it before I go to my work.
All right, no problem, sir.
All right, any final questions before I go? All right, so next week.